Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Ian Yee, an award-winning Malaysian investigative journalist and the co-founder of impact journalism startup The Fourth. As a member of the advisory committee for Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Journalism Fund, Ian is also an Obama Foundation leader. He talks to us about his experience growing up Malaysian-Chinese and how he got into investigative journalism. Welcome to Proudly Asian, Ian. It's great to speak to you again and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I know last time we met, it was actually around 5 years ago. We met on a media panel where we spoke about your great work. And of course, for this episode, we're going to continue talking about that. But at the same time, we're going to talk about you because we would like to get to know a little bit more about your background, how you get started with journalism, and, some of the tips and tricks that you have about investigative journalism. So to get the conversation started, I'm going to ask you one question that I ask every single guest on the show. To just begin the conversation, tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? Where did you grow up? And how many languages do you speak?
So, who am I? My name is Ian. I guess in this context, I identify most as a investigative journalist. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, specifically in what we call a new village. It's kind of a remnant of British colonial rule, where there was a period in time where they basically got all the Chinese Malaysians together, dumped them into these ghettos, and under the reason was to avoid them like mixing with the communists, and so it's crazy. So it was a pretty rough place to grow up, and anyway, that informed quite a lot of who I grew up to be. I feel like in terms of wanting to do the type of work that I do now, in terms of trying to help people with media, doing advocacy and stuff like that. And because of that as well, I know I speak quite a few languages. Being in Malaysia, I speak Malay, but because I'm Malaysian-Chinese, I also speak Mandarin, Hakka. People in Malaysia speak a lot of Cantonese, especially in Kuala Lumpur. So Cantonese and obviously English. Yeah.
And I just want to quickly ask you about the Cantonese language, right? Because the media panel that I met you at took place in Hong Kong. I'm just wondering if you ever noticed any differences between the Cantonese language that's spoken in Hong Kong. Like, is it kind of similar? Is it the same as in Malaysia?
Yeah, the Cantonese in Hong Kong is very similar to what we speak, but it just sounds so much more elegant coming from you guys. In Malaysia, it's kind of a mishmash, and I think there's a bit of an edge to it, when we speak in Malaysia. It's
Interesting, because I know the Cantonese in Hong Kong is also not known as elegant, so it's quite interesting coming from you.
Compared to us, it sounds beautiful. It sounds amazing. Yeah.
Okay, but going back to growing up in Malaysia, right? What was it like, really? What's an experience that would really bond most people who grew up in the country?
I think in Malaysia, the thing that we pride ourselves most is being a really multicultural society. The largest group, obviously, the Malays, and then you have the Chinese, Indians, and a lot of other, amazing cultures and ethnicities all living together. Not always in perfect harmony. Usually not the fault of the people, but kind of like racist structures. But I think that's probably the main thing. We grow up celebrating and partaking of each other's culture, and I think the best manifestation of that is through our food. So I think Malaysians were very, very proud of our food, very, very protective of it. So you can't say anything bad about our food because it's such a huge reflection of our society. So food here, you'll find on the same street, you'll find Malay food, Chinese food, Indian food, fusion, everything, and it's just amazing. So personally, I'm quite proud of that too.
And a follow-up question is that I know this is still a debate, but in your point of view, where does Hainan chicken rice come from?
Well, it definitely doesn't come from Hainan, right? That's all I know. Like my parents been to Hainan and they're like, I asked her, I made the usual joke. So did they just call it chicken rice there? And they're like, no, it's not even a thing. Yeah, huge debate. And I don't want to offend any of our Singaporean friends or Singaporean viewers, but yeah, I think there's cultures that are shared, right? It doesn't mean that matter where it comes from, though it obviously came from Malaysia first, but it's fine.
Yeah, and then other variations, they're just kind of derived from the original version in Malaysia, in your view. Is that right?
Nah, I don't know. I've not done any research on it, but again, like I said, this is why I said earlier on that we Malaysians are fiercely proud of our food. You can't diss it. Yeah. So, and I think Singaporeans are probably the same. And it's amazing because we have all these different cultures, and they're also found in different Southeast Asian countries. Like, for example, we have satay. And that's something that Indonesia has. Like chicken rice, that's something we, in Singapore have, and so on and so forth. And in the northern states in Malaysia, they have tom yum as well. So yeah, so it's all like mixed up here, which is just a beautiful experience to grow up with. Yeah.
And I mean, as you mentioned earlier, in Malaysia, there's a major presence of multiple ethnic groups and indigenous people, and cultural experiences and customs could be quite different among the people in Malaysia. So, could you tell us about the racial and cultural dynamics in Malaysia with your own personal experiences?
Well, growing up, I think the dynamics were great. As you grow, when you're in school, when you're in college, you really don't feel it. You just hang out with everyone. Even though there's a strange thing with our school system where there are vernacular schools as well as, so there are schools that are national schools where everybody's taught largely in Malay, and then there's schools for that are taught largely in Chinese and in Tamil, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, everybody gets along, and it's only when you grow a bit older, when politics gets into the picture, where you start to see the ugly side of it, where you start seeing how the race card is used to further political agendas. But it just shows how racism is something that is taught, right? It's something that is manufactured by people who want to use it for their own purposes. And as children, you really don't see that color. Like my kids, they go to preschool with so many different races. It's amazing, and they celebrate Idul Fitri, they celebrate Chinese New Year, they celebrate Christmas, and it's such an amazing. It's so nice to be able to let them have all these different experiences. So yeah, it's a sad indictment of the way I think politics often works.
Yeah, I definitely could relate to that a little bit as well, because I think as a kid, I also didn't remember thinking so much about identities like race, like different ethnicities as well. But now I want to ask a little bit more about your journalism career, because from what I read on the internet, apparently your journalism career turned out to be kind of an accident. Can you tell our listeners about how you actually get started with the journalism career?
So growing up, we didn't have all that much money. So like I said, we grew up in what we call these new villages, which are like, ghettos that the British used to just dump all the Chinese people in to keep them away from the communists. So even, decades later, the poverty is still in these places. In fact, that place still is still almost still kind of a dump. A lot of people will still see it as like, you wouldn't want to go there to hang out. Even though it's like quite gentrified. Still no Starbucks, so it still has character. So when it was time for me to go to college, my parents really didn't have that many options. We didn't come from a wealthy family at all. And one of the cheapest, courses to take at the time was mass communications. Went to the career fair. I was like, I like to read, I like to write. My parents always taught me that, we came from a very traditional Chinese background, but my parents always believed that English was like the language of the world. And that's where they bought us a lot of books and told us, you gotta learn how to speak English, which is hence why the dichotomy of me coming from that background, but still speaking the way I do. So when I got there, that's what the career counselor said, like, you should try journalism. And I figured, all right, it's the only thing we could afford anyway, so let's do it. But then, when I did my internship at the start, I had really, really good editors who who helped me see what the real value of journalism is. Even though I really couldn't have been bothered more, like I really didn't care at the time. And when I got my first role at Rage as a cadet journalist, my editors again kept telling me, journalism is more than just lifestyle and entertainment stuff that I wanted to do at the time. And from there, it kind of just stuck. So when I took over at Rage as editor later on, it just became a natural thing for me to want to continue the great work that my editors had started. So yeah.
Nice. And quick question. When you decided to go for journalism for school, right? Did your parents say anything? Did they say, don't go for journalism? Or would they be like, oh, it would be better if you went for some traditional courses that Asian parents like, for example, accounting and, like finance?
So funny thing is, I did want to be a musician, a career musician. And I was like doing part-time, like I was giving lessons. I was working at a small music company. So I guess for them, like, oh, you're taking journalism now? It's like, okay, that's an upgrade. So I guess that's the lesson, keep expectations low and then exceed. Yeah.
So may I ask what musical instrument you taught? I'm curious.
I taught a bit of everything. So I was like the jack of all trades and master of nothing. So my parents very, very wisely kind of steered me away from that career. They were like, yeah, you're getting by, but are you really going to make a living out of this? So they kind of told me, why don't you get a proper degree and then, do whatever you want after that. So I said, fine, okay. And what's the cheapest course? What's the one that I can do with minimum fuss? So journalism it was. Yeah.
I see. That's interesting. But who actually has the biggest influence on you? And what kind of life lessons did you learn from that person or those people?
I think my parents and grandparents, definitely. So like growing up in Jinjiang, where I grew up in that new village, life was difficult. There was a lot of poverty everywhere. There's a lot of crime. And I was lucky because I only spent maybe my first 5 or 6 years there. And my parents spent their entire lives there. But they dedicated their lives to helping people in the community, so they were Christian ministers. And I just saw how their entire lives were really about helping people. And it was very similar to my grandparents. So it's all about taking care of family, taking care of, people that have come to you for help. So I guess that kind of defined some of the work that I chose to do. It's also why when I came into journalism, when those editors told me those things about how media should be a force for good, it really resonated with me, and that's why I stayed. So yeah.
Naturally, I would like to do a deep dive into your investigative journalism work. And you briefly mentioned after you joined Rage, which is the lifestyle section of the Star newspaper in Malaysia as a cadet journalist, you worked your way up to the editor position and you literally fought for the lifestyle section to become an investigative journalism unit. Could you tell us about how you convinced the leadership team in the newsroom at the time? How did you convince them to let you make this pivot happen?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't just the lifestyle section. It was the college lifestyle section, right? So I think it was not too tough a sell because it wasn't doing well. A lot of newspapers at the time, their idea of what young people wanted was probably not very accurate. It's probably being decided by people who weren't very young. So it wasn't working out that well anyway. So when I took over as editor, I guess they were kind of like, let's just put that guy there and hope he messes up and we can shut the whole thing down. So again, keep expectations low and exceed them. But I was very lucky because I was so lucky to get a good team around me. Just a couple of really good hires makes a huge difference. Other people that kind of bought into this idea and really fed it and encouraged it in me as well. So some of them like Elroy Yee is another one who was with there at the start. Samantha Shan, who's probably won who've won some of the awards that you might know of. So with that core group, we kind of knew that we had the ability to do something good. So we just had to stay the course and keep going back to the management and listen to some of their very legitimate concerns in terms of why they thought it was a bad idea. So we spent about 1.5 years going back and forth, and they were telling us, "Oh, this is not going to work because of this." So we're like, "All right, let's address that. Let's go back to the drawing board, fix that, and come back." And finally, just the stars aligned and clicked, and they said, "You know what? Fine, go get it done. You need cameras, fine, go buy it. I think it was just, again, it came back to that. Yeah, let's just let him have his fun. And then when it doesn't work out, then we can get rid of the whole team, maybe. I don't know. But thankfully, the first project worked out well. The video kind of went viral, and the Malaysian government responded to it. And then the next video, and it just really accelerated. It just took off. By the third or fourth documentary we released, I think then the company realized we were onto something, and then they really, really backed it. So yeah.
Yeah, wow. It's so inspiring. Going back to the beginning of it all, how did you know investigative journalism would be the way to go, of all the things that you could have done?
Well, for one, I had a real champion for it in the team. Like I mentioned, the names I mentioned are Elroy, Shan, and Samantha, who are just really, really great journalists, great instincts. So Elroy in particular was like a huge champion of it. Like, we had done a bit of investigative work when he came on to the team, and we were looking to take it to the next level, and he came in and was like, yeah, let's do it. If you want to take it to the next level, let's go. There's some undercover work to be done. There's some issues that we need to expose. And so I think from there, we just dived head first into it.
It was still kind of like a year-long process for you to fight for this to happen or to, gain the approval from the leadership team. So what were some of the key lessons that you learned from fighting for the new rage to happen?
I think as journalists, maybe sometimes we spend too much time empathizing with everyone else that we forget to apply those same principles to people within our organizations, maybe. And when you get a no, you're always like railing or raging against the system, and you're like, hey, this is so unfair, and you give up, maybe. So for me, I think the lesson I learned there was, in time of this years gone by, looking back, I understand why they said no the first few times, the first 6 months or 8 months or 9 months, when it was just, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So it's really just about trying to listen to the other side and understand what their challenges are, what their concerns are, and really, really trying to build on that and not give up. If it's worth doing, then stick with it and try to overcome these challenges. And another thing I learned is to look for common values. No matter how much you disagree with someone, chances are there are values that you share. That's how we did it. We spoke a lot about going back to real journalism. When we were speaking to some of our bosses, and that's really what got them going. They're like, you know what? Yeah, we used to do that stuff too. Why can't we do it anymore? And so that's where there were a few key people in the organization that were really batting for us. And they were the ones ultimately helped push it across the line. So thanks to them as well.
But I mean, now since back in the day, since taking on the new direction for Rage, right? And under your leadership, the team reported on many important stories, including sexual predators of children who led to new laws against child sexual crimes, and also illegal drug trade that led to the arrests of drug syndicate leaders. So, what was the most nerve-wracking moment for you as an investigative journalist?
Thankfully, there haven't been that many for a few reasons. Number one, again, I have a great team that does most of the field work. I'm usually behind the scenes. In fact, I'm usually the guy who's in the car. I'm the one listening in, and a lot of it is these really amazing young journalists who are out there, very passionate and obviously very, very good at what they do. Secondly, is we have the luxury, kind of, so to speak, of picking and choosing the projects. Like if we know we can't handle the risk, then we have the option of saying, it's not the time for us to do this. Unfortunately, we can't do this safely, being a fairly young team, without a lot of resources. There were very painful moments where we just had to shelve certain projects and say, let's get back to this when we find a safer way to go about it. But again, risk assessment, planning things down to a T, making sure that nothing can go wrong. If anything does go wrong, you have a fail safe, you have an exit strategy. So we've been very fortunate. I think the closest one would have been, there was not a particular incident, but the drug trade one that gave me some sleepless nights.
Are you ever worried about what could happen to you or your team as you work on these stories that could potentially put you guys in danger or trigger criminals to take revenge on you? How do you actually protect yourself as an investigative journalist?
One of the main ways that we keep ourselves safe is to make sure that we are working together with some people in the authorities, in law enforcement. They can give us an honest assessment about what the risk level is. So that's one way. And sometimes, when you get the feeling that somebody in law enforcement is involved in that crime, then you have to tread really carefully. We have to make sure you find officers that you can trust. You work with civil society, and chances are they'll be able to tell you, yes, I know this particular officer. He will help you. He will give you information. He will keep you safe. So that's one way to do it. But at the end of the day, I think any kind of investigative work is going to come with risk, whether it's legal, whether it's cyber risk, whether it's physical, there's going to be risk. And in fact, there are journalists in many parts of the world that face much bigger threats than we do. Journalists not even too far from us, like in the Philippines and in Indonesia, where it's physical harm, right? So we kind of accept the risk. We work together as a team to have each other's backs, to make sure that we do those risk assessments properly. We have each other's emergency contacts. We know exactly where we are most of the time. It is a painful process sometimes. It is nerve-wracking, but we always tell ourselves, if we don't do it, then nobody else, chances are nobody else is going to do it. And if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right, put an end to it, and move everything just a step forward and advance. You know what I mean? Just make things a bit safer for everybody, and that's the only way you can do it. Take just one small step forward every time.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of planning is being done even before you guys do the actual reporting work. And I mean, when it comes to investigative journalism, right? You just mentioned you're always the guy in the car, giving directions to the reporters, which sound like the agents. Like you're kind of looking at the map, the screen's like, go this way, go that way.
No, it's never that cool, but okay.
A lot of people assume it's very James Bond-like, but where you got all the cool gadgets to gather evidence and film footage. But is it really the case? What's the reality like?
No, it's usually really, really boring. It's just a lot of waiting. It's never really that exciting. And our senior producer at the time, Elroy, his rule is always that undercover work is always the last resort. So 99% of our work is going through documents. It's making phone calls, cold calling, doing doorstop interviews, digging on the internet. Yeah, that's like 99% of our work, archiving all that information. And that sometimes that 1% where we can't avoid it, we need to, where we feel like we need to get to the truth. There's no other way. Then we go undercover. So there's a lot of that people don't see, a lot of the great work that my team does that people don't see behind the scenes. And it's not just the investigative work as well. It's the storytelling work. Not everybody gets involved in the investigative work, right? And there's a lot of other stuff that goes on behind the scenes that make those pieces come together, make those documentaries come together. People in post-production, they got to understand the story. People in graphics, they were all amazing. So it just comes back to having a good team.
And of course, now you also have your own team because you co-founded The Fourth this year. Can you tell us a little bit more about what do you hope to achieve with this team?
As the name suggests, we hope to remind people of, the media is supposed to be the fourth estate, the fourth power that holds, the other branches of government accountable, that holds power in general, right, accountable. So that's what we want to do. Whether it's through investigative work, whether it's through creative work, whether it's through like advocacy content, what we call impact media or impact marketing, whatever it is, it's about showing people that the media has that power, to defend truth, to defend justice, and it might sound like illusions of grandeur, but to defend democracy at some level as well, right? So that's what we want to do. And I'm glad that a lot of the people who were with me at Rage, have continued to work with us, either on a full-time basis or as freelancers. So the talent is very thankfully, that's something that I always say, it's all about the team. And I want to add as well, because a lot of times, I think a lot of journalists still feel like they have to be lone wolves. They still feel like they're in competition with each other sometimes. And I guess sometimes the newsroom brings that out in people as well. I was lucky that being not as talented or as skillful as some of the other people that I was working with, I very quickly realized that I had to hire the right people and bring the right talent together. And I just need to be that guy in the car, reminding everyone, and listening in and just letting them, trusting that they're going to do a great job.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's what makes a great leader. But can you let us in on some of the exciting projects that the fourth is working on? Are you allowed to tell?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, we don't have that much in terms of investigative work right now. We've been still doing a lot of impact marketing just to make sure that we have enough funds. So we're operating as a social enterprise. We do a lot of commercial production work. We do a lot of impact consulting and marketing work, and that's just really to build out the funds to create more good journalism. And those projects, obviously, investigative work takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. So nothing much to update on that front. But I think we've worked with almost all our clients so far are from civil society or nonprofits, and they come to us and ask if we can help with some of their communications, help to create awareness on some of the issues they're working on. And so it's been great. It kind of feels like we're finally getting to do a lot of things that we always wanted to do, and we have control over it. Even if we have to do things for free, sometimes we're like, it's our call now. We get to help these great organizations, these great activists that we've always wanted to help, and we get to decide ourselves. So it's great.
And if some of our listeners around the world would like to support your work or even support your startup, what would be some of the ways for them to reach you guys?
We're on all the social media platforms, so you can reach out to us there. You can also email us at people@thefourth.media. And yeah, we're still working on a website. We're trying to do a subscription page, a donation/subscription platform. So hopefully that works out. But if not, then yeah, we always feel that as a social enterprise, we do have commercial work that we hope will be able to make this sustainable.
Nice. When you launch your website, I'll definitely share with my listeners.
Yes, please. Thank you.
But of course, actually, every time when I get to speak with a very accomplished journalist like yourself, I'm always curious to get their thoughts on the way forward for journalism. Of course, in this part of the world, in Asia, a lot of journalists actually operate in markets or nations where press freedom is relatively low. So, in your view, how can investigative work be carried out in places where there's no press freedom?
There's just no magic bullet solution to this at all, especially with limits on press freedom. And I heard somewhere, I can't remember who said this, which is bad because I'm a journalist, right? But somebody said that the solution to media oppression, the solution to bad journalism, the solution to misinformation is more good journalism. That's all you can do. Just keep doing better. There's so many other ways. You could try to create legislation. You could work with civil society. You could try so many different things. But ultimately, what we really need is to just do our jobs better and better. And eventually, I think that's what will bring people around. The public will want to support that good journalism, and that good journalism will hold governments accountable and hopefully slowly change legislation as well, change mindsets, change like in Malaysia, these type of systemic like ingrained racism. Things like that will change in time if you have good journalism, if you keep at it. So that's what we hope to achieve at the Fourth, and that's kind of it. Yeah.
In one of the previous podcasts that you spoke in, I think you mentioned it's kind of not productive to fight misinformation and fake news piece by piece, but the more effective way to do it would be keep putting out good work. But I'm going to ask you about mis and disinformation as well, because of course another challenge in the media industry around the world is that there's very low trust for the media industry, the traditional media, because most news consumers, they would like to believe that they've been fed fake information by the media organizations out there. They no longer consider news organizations as credible sources of information anymore. So mis and disinformation also gain popularity on social media. So why do you think news consumers tend to fall for false information online?
I think there was a pretty good study on this once, right? That misinformation travels 6 times faster, spreads 6 times faster on social media than anything that's actually real. And it's because, that's just the way the algorithm works, number one. Number two, it's also kind of feeds into human nature, right? Like you find something, if it's misinformation, chances are it's something new, something different. There's novelty to that information. Everyone's saying, the very straightforward truth. And you're like, oh, but I have something different. I read something different that none of y'all know. So I'm going to share that. And everybody else feels the same. I was like, oh, I didn't know this. And suddenly it becomes a very popular, unpopular opinion. You know what I mean? So unfortunately, I think that's what's happening. And social media companies have a lot of responsibility to try to rein that in, because their algorithms literally feed into that, not just that sense of wanting to find something new, but also that sense of outrage, right? Indirectly, by design or by unintentional consequence, right? Whenever there's a heated argument, when there's Twitter beef, or whatever, a Twitter war, those posts tend to blow up, and I'm sure more could be done to solve that. So
And there's a lot of awareness education to be done among our aunties and uncles, our granddads. It's somehow the senior family members of not just Asians, but everyone's family, they tend to fall for these false information a little bit easier. Like they tend to share them in the family WhatsApp group or chat groups. So that's definitely one key source of fake news. And at the same time, I think a little while ago, I attended this misinformation and disinformation themed media conference organized by Google a couple years ago. I think one of the problems that we discussed was that in nations where multiple languages are spoken, for example, in India, there are at least 2,000 languages spoken. And in Malaysia, I could only imagine there must be a lot of languages going on within different ethnic communities as well. So to kind of target or fight misinformation and disinformation in a systematic way, it's very hard because there are so many languages that these information is spread.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me, because we see that in Malaysia. I'm not necessarily saying that there's misinformation in that flows differently, but just there's always a different style of reporting, and different focuses in the different vernacular media. So clearly, there's a different culture, and that news is going to spread. It's going to stick in different ways. That misinformation is going to spread in different ways. So that's really, really interesting.
What do you see will be the role journalists play in the future?
Well, I can speak to what we're trying to do, which I know not long ago a lot of journalists were very, very opposed to, which is trying to get involved in advocacy and activism, while using journalism and media, investigative media, to kind of advocate for a particular course of action or a particular solution. So when we first started doing it, there was quite a bit of pushback from veteran journalists who feel that we were overstepping and that it was compromising our neutrality or integrity of the reporting that we were doing. But I feel there should be a space for it. There's a space for breaking news and factual reporting, and there's also a space for solutions journalism, for impact journalism, which is what we call what we do. So there's a space for both of it, and I feel more and more people will be attracted towards doing impact journalism, advocacy journalism, and we'll see kind of in time maybe a 50-50 split.
I think that's definitely a very interesting discussion that's going on, because I do agree with you. In terms of innovation within the media space, I think one of the biggest challenges would still be senior members or veteran journalists in the industry pushing back on these new innovations, because it's important to keep the integrity, to keep the media industry the way that it has always been. But then at the same time, I mean, it's still kind of like a question to be solved. What is something new, or what kind of innovations can be introduced to the industry that would make the industry more profitable while keeping the integrity intact, right? So I think this is still kind of something that I think about on a daily basis.
I think multimedia storytelling, for sure. I think there are too many journalists who are doing so much great work, and it's just not being turned into how do I say it, into attractive, maybe that's not the right word, but into, compelling content for the digital consumer, right? So they're used to so much multimedia, so much production value put into the content that they consume, that just text alone sometimes is not gonna stick with them. So I think newsrooms need to start embracing that, needs to start investing in producing good, higher quality content, which is what Rut Rage did a lot. Like we made a huge push as part of our pivot to investigative work. We told them also it can't just be investigative journalism. For print, we have to start doing a video, which back then was like, what? You want to do investigative documentaries for YouTube? No one's going to watch that. YouTube is all for, like, I don't know, sports highlights or whatever at the time, like whatever it was, like acoustic covers of popular songs. So I think we need to realize that times are changing and we need to latch onto these trends, just like how we did with video and short form documentaries. Whatever it is now, we need to be able to get ahead of it and put aside maybe a bit of pride. And like, for example, if you've got to do news on TikTok or whatever other platform it is that you think, oh, that's just for kids. It's not. It's a really, really useful tool. It's a useful platform that has a huge audience, that has all these other storytelling tools. Like you can add captions, supers, it auto, captions, auto subtitles things. And it's amazing. So use it.
Nice. And now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. In this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked at some point in life, and also some common biased questions Malaysians get asked a lot by people outside Malaysia. So, Ian, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Let's go. First question. Malaysians are either unfriendly or overly friendly?
I think Malaysians are just right. Like, okay, so there's one perception that I think is quite true, which is Malaysians are really, really nice to foreigners. It's a strange culture, but I think that's kind of true. Like, if you see a fellow Malaysian, you're kind of like, but if you see somebody who's not from here, you're always like, oh, hey, have you tried this food? Oh, yeah, you need directions, I'll help you with anything, like, So that's kind of true, and we're overly friendly to foreigners, but not so much to each other.
Well, I mean, you're always nice whenever I see you. So is this the foreigner version of you?
Maybe. See? Yeah. If you were Malaysian, I probably wouldn't care less. Yeah.
Next question. You speak really good English.
Yes, I've received that. I don't get as offended at that as a lot of other people. I don't know, maybe it's just we just experience different things in life, but I take the compliment, because if I saw someone who looked really different from me and they were speaking a language that I was fluent in, I would also be really interested. I'd be like, wow, you speak really good Malay, but did you study in Malaysia or Indonesia? And I'd like to know more. So I just always try to see it that way. And thankfully, I do have an interesting story behind it. Like, I came from this new village, this ghetto, and my parents wanted to empower me through the power of English, the international language that will give me opportunities beyond this small town, and so it's a good story to tell. So if people ask me, I'll tell, yeah, that's why I speak good English. So,
and next up, I didn't know you could speak Chinese.
Yeah. So that one is very applicable to me. The first two, not so much. That is applicable to me because I do speak Chinese. I studied Chinese all the way to university. I wasn't very good at it, but I still did it. I speak 3 dialects, and but there's this thing, and I don't know if it's a uniquely Malaysian thing, but people just assume that I'm a banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. So I get that a lot. And in fact, I was in a meeting once with a colleague. I thought I knew. We'd known each other for quite a while. We worked in the same company, not every day together, but we get along. And somebody mentioned in the meeting that, there's this Chinese delegation coming, but hey, Ian speaks Chinese, he should go. And this colleague of mine just burst out laughing. He was like, oh God, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Ian speaks Chinese. Yeah, he's gonna go. And she just laughed for a good 10 seconds, and I was like, no, she's serious, I do speak Chinese. And she's just like, oh, that's hilarious, you speak Chinese. And after a while, everybody just said, he actually speaks Chinese. I try not to get offended by it, but yeah.
Wow. And next question.
Okay.
Malaysians all look the same.
That's weird. No, we don't. Okay. I guess it comes down to where you're seeing Malaysians. But no, like it's great. I think that's one of the great things about how we grew up. You have brown skinned people, you have someone who's fairer like me. It's crazy. That's such a wrong perception.
And finally, all Malaysians are Muslims.
Oh, okay. No, not true at all. I think we are majority Muslim nation. But there's plenty of us who are non-Muslim as well. So I'm not Muslim. Yeah.
Thank you for playing this round of Rapid Bias, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, to wrap up the episode, I just have one more question for you. Ian, what does it mean to be proudly Malaysian?
To be proudly Malaysian is to embrace the diversity that we have. And I know a lot of countries, a lot of places are becoming as diverse as we are. But I think we really got something special going on in terms of that, like in being, like a real melting pot. And that's what it is to be Malaysian.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Proudly Asian, Ian.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.